All right, our next speaker is Matt Pitzer from Simpson, Gumpertz, Heger, SGH, here in Boston. And he's an architect and project manager and part of the building technology group at SGH. He has experience in the assessment, restoration, and construction administration of historic and contemporary buildings. And he specializes in the evaluation of existing building envelopes, including historic and contemporary masonry, waterproofing, cladding systems, windows, and curtain walls. And today he'll be talking about the Carpenter Center, an incredible building over at Harvard University. Matt?
Thank you. So, as Paul noted, I'm Matt Pitzer. I'm an architect with SGH, and I've had the good fortune to get to work on the Carpenter Center over the last couple of years. The Carpenter Center was designed by Le Corbusier, whose formal name, Charles Edward Jeanneret, was born 1887 and lived to 1965. He was a Swiss-born architect, and growing up, he was originally trained as an engraver in Switzerland, and in his 20s, he moved to Paris and began studying painting, and eventually came to find himself in architecture. And through his career, he became one of the principal figures of the modernist architecture movement, and he was highly renowned for what is known as the International School of Architecture, which many brutalists and other concrete buildings fall into. So one of his most well-known achievements is his book, which was published in 1923, Towards a New Architecture. And this was a collection of essays that he had written earlier and published in L'Esprit Nouveau, so the new spirit. And he really wanted to focus on the idea of moving architecture away from the load-bearing mass masonry walls, which were still very prevalent at the time. So one of his philosophies was, we have these great new materials in concrete and glass, and our buildings should really be expressing the ability of these materials. And one of the funny things that I found in the book, he actually goes on to say that to kill an architect's creativity, you should send them to Rome. So that's like his thought process there, just to get an idea. This is still considered to be one of the most influential architecture books of the 20th century, and it's really known for highlighting 5 primary ideas that drove most of Corbusier's work, and among them are pilotis, roof gardens, the idea of a free plan, free facade, and ribbon windows, and I'll get into all of this more as we move in. Moving to the Carpenter Center specifically. So the way in which he was awarded the commission was an interesting story that we've found out. And part of this is, so at the time, Harvard was beginning their visual arts program. Until the 1950s, they did not have a visual arts program. And as part of that, they put together a study committee, pulled together the representatives, and went out and did their fundraising efforts. And Alfred St. Vrain Carpenter and his wife Helen Bundy were amongst their principal donors, making a donation of $1.5 million for the construction of this new arts building. One of the things that came with their donation was the idea that they would find a first-rate American architect to design the new art school that was going to be on Harvard's campus. And so they had a vision that this was going to be a custom to many of the other early constructed buildings on Harvard's campus, from H.H. Richardson or similar American-born architects. At the time, Joseph Sert was the dean of the Graduate School of Design, which is their architecture school, and coincidentally, the carpenter's son had just graduated from the design school studying under Sert. So when Sert came to the committee and recommended that his friend and former collaborator, Le Corbusier, design the building, it held some ground, and they were able to bring in Le Corbusier to design the building. They had a bit of a rocky start, and it actually took them 2 years to go through kind of contracting and other things before Le Corbusier made his first of 2 site visits that he would make to Cambridge in 1959. Almost immediately upon visiting the site, he realized that the building and the site were highly constrained. So the site sits between Quincy and Prescott Streets, and on either side of it, it's bound by Neo-Georgian buildings. And going back to Le Corbusier's idea of the free plan, one of the things that he always was trying to accomplish in his work was an idea of movement through the buildings. So to accomplish this, he developed this principal organizing feature of this S ramp that connects Quincy and Prescott Streets and bisects the building. And the ramp was also meant to tie into the paths that are on the opposite side of Quincy Street leading into Harvard Yard. So this really kind of helped to be his pinnacle, I would say, of highlighting all of those concepts that we mentioned, and we'll go into further: the roof gardens, the free facade, the ribbon windows, and connections to the outdoors. So how he really did this and what he was doing. So he used these other elements, which these are the elements which you see within the concrete structure of pilotis. So pilotis I'll dive into: brise-soleil, aerators, and undulators. And these all were critical elements that he used throughout his career. And some of the criticism that you might find if you're doing other reading or research on this is that some people say that Corb knew that this was going to be kind of his last or only North American work, so he threw everything that he had at it. So that's kind of up for debate, I would say. So the ramp, as we talked about, is really the defining feature of the building, and it cuts right through the center. And this, as I mentioned, organizes the building, provides a way to link and create traffic. So it was this idea of movement that is always expressed continually. And the ramp draws up to the center of the building. So the building is 5 floors. The ramp stops and terminates right in the middle of the 3rd floor of the building. So it really goes to the actual geographic center of the building. The ramp also, as it's bisecting through the center of the building, provides these unobscured views into the studios on the 2nd and 3rd floor. And this was to express the ability to showcase the students' work that was occurring within the building. So just as he wanted to promote the movement across the campus through the ramp, he also wanted to create the idea of the lack of boundary between the interior and the exterior and provide a connection. And the ramp cutting through and having the windows on both sides, the idea behind that was that as students that were not in the art center passed through the space, they would see what the students were doing and how the art was being created. Another one of his defining elements is the roof gardens, which there's only one roof garden, unfortunately, that was actually executed on the building, and that is right there on the 3rd floor at the top of the ramp. And it is now still there. It's still very much in its original design. and it's outside of what is now the CERT Gallery. So the university has done a good job of continuing to keep this activity and promote the ideas that were originally put forth in the design. It is unfortunate, I would say, that some of the other roof gardens that were planned or designed were never implemented on the upper floors of the building. So going into those major defining elements that Korb carried throughout his designs. So the pilotis, so the idea with the piloti is to really showcase the concrete's ability to create these tall, slender columns. And what he always used these for was the idea of lofting the building off of the ground plane and creating this idea that the buildings weren't going to impede and create walls which you couldn't move between one area to the next. So by lifting the building on these pilotis, he was both creating this open floor plan, but also really expressing the ability of the concrete in creating these tall, slender columns. Another use of concrete on the building occurs in the form of the brise-soleils. So given that it was an art building, and this is also true for many of his other buildings, he wanted to maximize the connection to the outdoors from the inside, as I was saying earlier. And in doing that, it was important to work to reduce the impacts of solar radiation or glare that might occur if you had a flat glass facade. So in doing that, he creates these brise-soleils, which are these horizontal and vertical shelves which set the windows back and create a very filtered, natural daylight situation for the artist throughout the day. And again, you can see showcasing the ability of the concrete to create these slender, thin planes which perform functionally. The next element that you find at the Carpenter Center are known as ondulators. So these are very thin. They're almost 2 by 4 in dimension elements, and they're formed of concrete, supporting the edges of the glass windows. And they are used to create the idea of rhythm or compression, and they're primarily found around these curved elements. And the idea is that it starts to create, some movement or, almost rhythm in a song of, you get the idea of it pulling you around the corner. And the last of his, elements that you find are the aerators. And the aerators are operable doors, essentially, that are located throughout the building. And they break up the pattern of the ribbon windows in many of the areas. And they're used to provide the natural ventilation throughout the space. And, excuse me, being a concrete structure, this is also where Le Corbusier, coming from his painting background, was able to do his play and study with color, which is the only color other than what occurs on interior walls within the building. So getting into how the building is holding up today and the current condition. So the building is really in excellent condition for a building of its age. And there's, on the vertical facades, especially the brise-soleil elements, there's very minimal to no spalling or cracks. I think our survey around the building, we found approximately half a dozen of them that needed to be addressed immediately. And of those, I believe half of them were directly related to the ramp, which is the exception in this being excellent condition. It's kind of ironic that the primary organizing feature of the building is the portion of the building which is experiencing the most deterioration and has seen the most wear. But we've been able to kind of clearly identify that this is really due to the fact of a significant amount of de-icing salts that have been used throughout the building's history. And you can just see the history of repairs that have happened over the top of the ramp there. So another element that is really unique to the building that we have been dealing with are the windows. So these are the windows. The ramp is there along the left, and these are windows looking into the wood shop, and then the painting studio is above. And these pieces of glass are 12-foot square, single pane, annealed polished plate glass. And you can just see in this photo how true the reflection is of the buildings across the street, right? So it's a perfectly straight line from one pane of glass to the next. If we ever have to replace one of these panes of glass and we use a modern glass that is heat strengthened or tempered, it's going to look like we just put a funhouse mirror up next to the existing glass. So this is a challenge that we've been working on, is to research and try and identify potential glass suppliers in the event that one of these pieces of glass ever needs to be replaced. And if you look in this photo, that's a miter saw that's sitting right next to the window. There's table saws, all kinds of other things in the wood shop. So they have had a few pieces of glass that have broken. Thankfully, it has not been any of these kind of monumental pieces to date. With the windows and replacing the glass, the other part that is really unique and can be seen in a few of Le Corbusier's designs are the fact that the glass is hard set directly into the concrete without a frame. So on the left, you can see one of the aerators there that the glass just comes and sits in with the sealant joint. And on the right is the detail where you see the brise-soleil extending out at the base, a little sloped glass stop, and then the glass is set directly against it. So we've been working to try to think about what we can do to potentially help them in the future. There's no, hard points on all your sides of glass, not ideal. So thinking about ways that we might be able to cushion with maybe neoprene pads or other things in the future. So in closing, the building, it's highly significant mid-century modernist building, constructed in 1963. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978. 15 years after the building was completed, it was put on the National Register. And I think that just goes to speaking to how much it was understood how significant it was. And this is partly because it is the only building in North America that was designed by Le Corbusier. And in addition to that, it was actually, the working drawings were all done by certain associates. So two very prominent modernist architects. This is, and it may be the last building that was constructed that was designed by Le Corbusier. He unfortunately passed away before the building was completed, so he never had the opportunity to see it. But you're in Boston and you do, so I would highly recommend. It's just a short trip down the Red Line, right next to Harvard Square. It's worth the trip, and it's actually a pilgrimage, I'd say, that many architects throughout the world make. So if you are there, don't be surprised to see other people there. Like, taking photos, walking around the building to experience it. The first level is part of the gallery space. It's open to the public, so you can go into the first level. And thank you.